Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. We have now entered day 12 of Russia's war on Ukraine, with a third round of talks between the two countries ending today with no major breakthroughs. Negotiations are hitting a roadblock because Russian President Putin is calling on Ukraine to abandon his efforts to join NATO, acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory, and completely demilitarize, among other extraordinary demands. Russia is also accused of targeting civilian evacuation points outside of Kyiv, where several casualties were reported today. The UN says in total more than 400 civilians have been killed and more than 800 more have been injured in the ongoing conflict. 1.7 million Ukrainians who fled their homes are now considered refugees. The Pentagon announced today 500 U.S. troops are being deployed to Europe to beef up NATO. Congress is expected to approve a $10 billion humanitarian, military, and economic aid package for Ukraine, as Lithuania is warning that Putin may push beyond just attacking Ukraine. Top lawmakers have also reached a deal to ban Russian energy imports as a way of punishing Russia for invading Ukraine. All that as the debate continues over whether a no-fly zone over Ukraine should be imposed, and now a major new wrinkle in the already high-stakes conflict. We just learned this weekend that 31-year-old two-time Olympic champion and seven-time NBA All-Star center Brittney Griner was arrested 3 weeks ago at an airport near Moscow on drug charges. Griner was taken into custody for allegedly having vape cartridges containing hashish oil in her luggage. Griner was in Russia playing for a Russian team during her offseason, which she has done for the last 7 years. According to CBS News, a criminal case has been opened, and the punishment can carry a jail sentence of up to 10 years in Russia. Her wife posted this message on Instagram yesterday, thanking fans for the concern, but also asking for privacy as her family now works to get Griner back home safely. Secretary of State Blinken says that the U.S. is working to free any and all Americans in Russian custody. Joining me now to discuss is former FBI double agent and editor-at-large at Newsweek, Naveed Jamali. So, Naveed, let me just ask this question about this. We learned about it 3 weeks after it happened, but clearly they knew, the teammates knew, the family, I'm sure, knew. Could the reason for them not wanting to make a big deal out of it is that it may be easier to get her out of there if the Russians don't feel embarrassed by having to hand her over?
Absolutely. I mean, clearly this was pre-invasion. It's undoubtedly, look, this is what the Russians do, Charles. They're ham-fisted goons when it comes to this stuff. This is clearly some bogus, trumped-up thing that was meant to embarrass the United States. And the way the U.S. deals with this simply is to quietly try and negotiate releases like this. And this is not the first time. There's two other Americans that are being held in sort of these trumped-up charges and have been in jail for quite some time. So this is, sadly, this is just like, this is what they say is out of the Russian playbook. This is exactly what they do.
So then how much leverage does the U.S. have if at the same time they're asking for her release, they're imposing sanctions on Russia as a country and also its oligarchs?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I hate to say it, but let's just be honest, that we don't have any leverage. I don't know that we even have negotiations going on, and if there are negotiations, they're certainly talking about Ukraine. They're not talking about Americans that are being unjustly held in Russia. I mean, this is, she's unfortunately caught up in something that has nothing to do with her, and sadly, it's not going to be resolved, most likely, anytime in the immediate near future. Again, I don't even know that the Americans are having bilateral talks about this. It just, there's, with Ukraine going on, you can't negotiate with something else. It's the focus is really on trying to get the Russians out of Ukraine.
I think we're being joined by Naira Haq, who's also a host here at BNC. We do not have Naira Haq. I thought we did have her. Naveed, I want to ask you this as well. Are there any people being held in the United States who are Russian that the Russians would want back as kind of a tit for tat for releasing Griner? I've seen this happen before, where negotiating for a hostage or whatever. They say, well, you have to give us this person that you are holding.
Right. Yeah. So there's this is a very common question. This whole thing of swapping spies, for example. Yes, Charles, that does happen quite a bit. Look, the difference is that if there's someone who's in the United States who is convicted of a crime, you can't just spring them. There has to be sort of this presidential pardon. There has to be some sort of finding that happens. So in the past, there like Marina Butina, perfect example. She was exchanged, or before her, there was a bunch of other Russian spies that were swapped over. But it has to be done in this method before they're found guilty, because you can't just spring a convicted felon or someone out of jail and just swap them. There has to be some sort of presidential pardon. So your question though is right. Like the Russians clearly did this. I mean, come on, hashish, in oil. I mean, this is clearly just some bogus thing that, even if it's true, which it's Russia, they can make anything up. Even if it's true, they clearly did it with the intent of trying to use this to gain some sort of leverage. They do this all the time, and I'm surprised there haven't been more Americans detained in some sort of Trump-up charge for espionage or God knows what else. Or probably we'll see reporters next, arrested for trying to promote civil unrest. I mean, this is just what they do. They just, the rule of law has no concept in Russia.
So the U.S. now is considering a ban on all Russian energy imports. That will only ratchet it up. They'll make Putin more angry. Are we getting further and further and further away from a release from her? Both the things that the U.S. government is doing, we are reporting this because we're reporters, but the family doesn't want a lot of media attention because I'm assuming, think that this works against them.
So I don't know this for sure, but in previous cases where there have been hostages or people detained, the State Department is usually in contact with, there's a thing called the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell that actually deals with this. And I'm sure, and again, I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine that the U.S. government through that cell is in touch with the family. And look, it's always advisable that in certain cases, early on this stage, the government asked the family not to comment. They don't want to embarrass the Russians more than they need to, as you said. And I think that if you go out there and say things, it makes it harder for the situations to de-escalate. Look, clearly the Russians, they don't need to detain her. She hasn't been convicted of some massive crime. They found, hashish oil in a vape pen. I mean, it's the equivalent of, trying to jail a Russian diplomat here for jumping a turnstile in New York City. It's just as irrelevant. So they don't want to make a big deal about it, I'm sure, and they asked the family not to politicize this, and hopefully, with the hope being that there can be some sort of back channel conversation. But right now, I got to say, Charles, it's just, I don't know if the Russians are even able to speak to their counterparts in the United States. There's just been a real freezing of diplomatic channels.
Brittney had real business in Russia. There are other Americans who have real legitimate business in Russia at this time. What would be your advice to those people to get out of Russia immediately and to hold off on all business relations, or what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, in a sentence, get out. I mean, there's severe sanctions. I don't even know how you can do business. How could you even get paid by the Russians? You can't, you can't process any payment from their banks. You can't take credit cards. So if there's an American hoping to do business in Russia right now, I would have to be suspicious of why they're there. What I do worry about, Charles, legitimately, I think we should worry about this, is the press that is out there, the international press that is covering this. And, we hope that the Russians don't crack down on them, and they have done so in the past. And again, business people is one thing, but the press, look, we have a right to cover this. And I just hope the Russian, government and Putin doesn't crack down on them. But I suspect that they will.
I have less than a minute left here, but I just want to get your sense of what would be the conditions that Brittney would be held in for this kind of a charge?
So I think she's in some detention. I don't think it's pleasant. I don't think they're torturing her or anything like that. But she's held in some level of prison. It's not pleasant. And, I'm sure that she's deprived of knowing what's going on outside communication. I don't know if her family's been able to speak to her. I don't know if the consulate has been able to speak to her. So I'm sure it's not pleasant. I'm sure it's tough. And my heart goes out to her and her family. It's completely, she's an innocent victim in this. Simply put, there's no reason for her to have been arrested other than to make a political statement to the United States. And she unfortunately was used as a pawn by the Russians. And it's just, again, another example of how, they look at things, and it's just unconscionable.
We're going to keep thinking of Brittney and keep following the story as developments unfold. Naveed Jamali, thank you so much for joining us tonight.